Today, we're pleased to have Mr. Steve Peterson, who is a managing partner of Millrock Development, LLC. Mr. Peterson, Millrock Park is a 500,000 square foot Class A office park in Halladay, Utah. Together with his Millrock team, Mr. Peterson developed one of the most successful Class A office projects in Utah. Mr. Peterson has successfully developed and invested in real estate and commercial properties within the Salt Lake Valley over the last 30 years with expertise that specializes in entitling many of these projects. And if you've never entitled a project, my guess is you'll speak about that. That is not always super easy, as Soren can attest to as well. Mr. Peterson is seeking acquisition and development opportunities of additional commercial real estate in the western United States, in addition to investing in cutting-edge startup technology businesses. I understand his in-laws are here with him, and I've heard that behind every successful man is a shocked mother-in-law. So we're grateful to have you here with Steve today. In addition, Steve is a member of the National Advisory Board for the Woodbury School of Business, which kind of makes him my boss's boss. So let's be nice to him today. Steve is married to Shannon, and I'll give a point to anyone who knows how to spell Shannon correctly. Anyone want to help me with this? Go. Wrong. There you go. What's your name? See me after. Thank you. She did the French spelling. I've been spelling it wrong for the 2 years that I've known her, and I apologize. The dean was kind enough to correct me last night. By kind enough, I got fired, so I don't know that that's really good. They have 2 children, a son who's attending BYU, a married son who's attending BYU, and he and his wife live there, and a daughter who's serving a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It used to be so much easier. She was a Mormon missionary. Now she's got a longer title in Philadelphia. Please join me in welcoming Steve to the stage.
Thank you. Thanks. Well, good morning. It's good to be with you today, and have my lovely wife with me, who serves as our vice president of Millrock Capital. And I can tell you probably one of the most important decisions you'll make in your life is who you decide to chase your dreams with and meet your goals and your journey through life. So I'd say I've chosen well, and thank you, Shannon, for such a wonderful ride and journey that we've experienced. I'd like to talk a little bit about myself, introduce a little bit of background so you have an understanding where how I got to where I'm at. I grew up in a humble home in Cottonwood Heights. My parents didn't have many financial resources, but they were well educated. Father had a master's degree in architecture, and mother was a nurse. And loving parents, very kind, and wonderful parents that I was fortunate to be blessed with. And in the neighborhood during Christmas time, I had friends that would open up all these wonderful gifts and toys. And in my home, I'd open up a little stocking with an orange and some nuts, and might receive a pair of Levi pants or something like that, some article of clothes that I needed. So I learned early on that Santa Claus was not real, and that we live in a society where there's many differences in terms of social class, intellectual, and economical classes of a system that we live in. And when so with that realization, I early on started setting my goals and started to establish work patterns where I would, at a very young age, around 10 to 12 years old, I worked in a restaurant. I washed dishes. I was a busboy, prepared hors d'oeuvres. Later on in my junior high years, I worked in construction while going to school, and sheetrocking and framing and things such as that. And then in my high school years, I worked at a retail store. Started out in the back of that store with the shipping department. Eventually I was promoted into the sporting goods area, sold sporting goods, and then over into jewelry. And while in high school, I did a study on how that particular entity could be more efficient. And as a result, I won a state competition in that, and then I went on to nationals and placed in that. And it allowed me to receive an offer of a scholarship at BYU, Utah State. And so as I went into into school, we didn't have the resources at home, so between grants and scholarships and loans, I put myself through school. And once I graduated, I started a company called AI Systems. And AI Systems was a system integration company where we developed a third-party application for Autodesk and eventually developed our own CAD software. And it was very disruptive at the time. It was in the mid-'80s where most of those solutions were in mainframes or minis, and the PC was introduced, and so there was a lot of value there of what we were providing. And our first year in business, we did about $1 million in sales, and our profit was about 40%. So I looked back and I thought, well, why did I stay in school so long if that's how business is? And so I built that business up with a friend, and during that time, I'd take whatever additional resources we had that Shannon and I had made together, and we invested that into property. And what I would focus on is doing the entitlements with the city, the municipalities, and working with the residents and finding common compromise. I don't think anybody really gets what they want, but everybody compromises to find what's the best solution for both the community and the developers and the stakeholders in these projects. And we'd always just kind of parlay that into other projects. And then eventually, that business that I had started in the software company, I sold it to a public company, and so I decided to go full-time into development. And I'm not sure if this is turned on. There we go. So I established, all through that process, I established goals at a very young age. And every 5 years, I would update those goals and see how I was tracking with them. And I have a friend, and she uses a vision board. But I feel like it's really important to know where you're going and what you have a passion for. My father would always say that, his father had a job that he didn't like going to work every day, but he did because he needed to take care of his family. So my father went into architecture because he loved to draw and to create. And so he was fortunate enough to work in a profession that he really had a passion for. And I think as we think about the future, as we establish our goals, it's really important to know, what do we do well, how do we exceed in that, and what we really have passion for. And so as I went through that process, I found that it was really fun having a vision of what a particular property could become or how we could develop that. And we ended up developing a project called Millrock Park in Halladay. And it was an old gravel pit, consisted of 22 acres. We had neighbors that were really opposed to it. They felt like, that they didn't want the density or the height. We worked through that, and we were able to develop 500,000 square feet, Class A office space, and attracted tenants such as Wells Fargo, Morgan Stanley, GE Capital. And it became, pretty much a landmark of distinction there. One of the other more current projects that we're working on is Sandy Towers. This is in Sandy City, and it consists of about 450,000 square feet. We've finished the first phase in this project, and the second phase will be located on State Street and about 9800 South. And the third project here is Sojo Station. I would say that's probably one of our some of the best work we've done to date. This one received Best Development of the Year in the state of Utah last year. We've filled up the first phase of it with companies such as In Moment, Lucid Software, Pluralsight, these are all high-tech companies in the valley that are growing rapidly. Homey's another one that's tied into the residential space that's disruptive, finding a better value for people wanting to sell their real estate. And then the second phase is under construction, and that'll be completed at the end of this year, and we have Avanti going in there. They're a multi-billion-dollar company. They're going to take all 180,000 square feet of that second phase. And what's so exciting about this particular project is that there's a front-runner stop right there. So it's what we call a TOD, a transit-oriented development. And in a transit-oriented development, we have people coming to work and going home. And because the stop is right there, they can just walk out and go right into buildings. At the end of the day, they can get back on the mass transit and go home and then tie into the bus system. And our traction rate there, participation from the employees is about 25%, which is quite high. And this is helping reduce the carbon footprint in a small way in our community and providing forward thinking. And a lot of our companies in the community are trying to figure out how do we reduce these carbon footprints. And this is one of the solutions that on our part of the process that we are really grateful to be part of. So the American dream is still alive. And I think that a lot of that has to do with the system that we have, the system of free enterprise. And my belief is that the only limitations we have as Americans are those that we place on ourselves. We have a system like no other in the world. And so I'd like to talk about the free market, free trade, or what capitalism is. And there's a professor that, his name was Milton Friedman, and he won the Nobel Prize for economics, and in 1976, for his research on consumption analysis and monetary history and theory. Let's listen to him on how he defines the free market system.
The basic principles underlying the free market, as Adam Smith taught them to his students in this university, are really very simple. Look at this lead pencil. There's not a single person in the world who could make this pencil. Remarkable statement? Not at all. The wood from which it's made, for all I know, comes from a tree that was cut down in the state of Washington. To cut down that tree, it took a saw. To make the saw, it took steel. To make the steel, it took iron ore. This black center, we call it lead, but it's really graphite, compressed graphite. I'm not sure where it comes from, but I think it comes from some mines in South America. This red top up here, the eraser, bit of rubber, probably comes from Malaya, where the rubber tree isn't even native. It was imported from South America by some businessmen with the help of the British government. This brass ferrule, I haven't the slightest idea where it came from, or the yellow paint, or the paint that made the black lines, or the glue that holds it together. Literally thousands of people cooperated to make this pencil. People who don't speak the same language, who practice different religions, who might hate one another if they ever met. When you go down to the store and buy this pencil, you are in effect trading a few minutes of your time for a few seconds of the time of all those thousands of people. What brought them together and induced them to cooperate to make this pencil? There was no commissar sending out orders from some central office. It was a magic of the price system, the impersonal operation of prices that brought them together and got them to cooperate to make this pencil so that you could have it for a trifling sum. That is why the operation of the free market is so essential, not only to promote productive efficiency, but even more, to foster harmony and peace among the peoples of the world.
I find that research of his fascinating, that people all over the world can come together for a common cause and create product, and there's no government or structure that does that. It's just the free market system that provides that. So in the free enterprise system, there are 5 pillars: private enterprise, competition, private property rights, profit motive, and consumers. In the freedom of choice, whether I choose to be a developer or a programmer or a doctor, lawyer, whatever I want to do with my life, we have that opportunity to do that within our system. And it's just a matter of us deciding what we want to do and then go out and do it and figure out how we add value to the consumers. The private property rights are something that are not granted in every country throughout the world, in fact, very few. If you're a farmer in South America, from generation to generation, as a farmer, you lease that land and there's no ownership. In America, we have rights to own our property, whether it be personal or it be real property. And that really sets us apart. And that actually is a dynamic that really changes the structure of how wealth is generated in our society. There's always a profit motive behind everything, and the consumer determines how that system works. And the profit motive, we have something we sell for a certain price. It costs us so much to manufacture. What's left over there is our profit. And so we try to figure out how we become more efficient and effective and create more profit and be more profitable to sustain that. But our consumer, the competition helps us by becoming better at what we do, providing better service. And it's actually a healthy thing to have in our economic ecosystem that we compete in. And then the consumer. The consumer is really who determines what products they buy, and they determine what products are going to be successful and what businesses go out of business based on supply and demand. And so if we develop products that are in demand, we should be able to be successful as we meet their needs and identify those needs and meet them. So one thing about capitalism, which is really amazing, and it's not really talked about much, but it's that probably more than any other system out there that it's allowed more people to come out of poverty and enjoy a better standard of living. Let's hear what these specialists have to say about how capitalism has helped eliminate a lot of poverty throughout the world.
The next time you hear someone complain about capitalism, consider this. The percentage of people living at starvation-level poverty has fallen 80% since 1970. Before then, more than 1 in 4 people around the world were living on $1 a day or less. Today, it's about 1 in 20. This is the greatest anti-poverty achievement in world history. So, how did this remarkable transformation come to pass? Was it the fabulous success of the United Nations? The generosity of U.S. foreign aid? The brilliant policies of the International Monetary Fund and World Bank? Stimulus spending? Government redistribution? No, it was none of those things. It was capitalism. Billions of souls around the world have been able to pull themselves out of poverty thanks to 5 incredible innovations: globalization, free trade, property rights, the rule of law, and entrepreneurship. Globalization means the ever-increasing ability to move goods, people, and ideas from one distant location to another. Free trade is open access to markets and people from all over the world with few, if any, barriers. Property rights is ensuring that what belongs to you can't be taken away on a whim by the state. The rule of law safeguards contracts, assuring that they will be respected and lived up to whether the deal is made in Peru or Poland. And entrepreneurship is the creativity of free people to dream up new products that we never knew we wanted or needed. It's worth noting that in places like East Asia, these 5 things were all made possible by the historic peace after World War II that resulted from America's global diplomatic and military presence. Let me put this in a slightly different way. The ideals of free enterprise and global leadership, central to capitalism and American conservatism, are responsible for the greatest reduction in human misery since mankind began its long climb from the swamp to the stars. This remarkable progress has been America's gift to the world. So, if these American conservative ideals have done so much to lift up the world's poor, you'd think conservative ideas would be gaining strength every single day, everywhere. And not just gaining strength among conservatives, but also among young idealists, immigrants, minorities, and advocates for the poor, all embracing the principles of free enterprise and unleashing its power on behalf of the vulnerable. But this hasn't happened. To the contrary, capitalism is struggling to attract new followers. Indeed, some believe it's destined to fade away, just as it has in much of Europe. According to a Harvard study, only 42% of young Americans 18 to 29 have a favorable view of capitalism. What explains this discrepancy between the incredible results of capitalism and its popularity? Why does capitalism get such a bad rap? One answer is simple. The defenders of free enterprise have done a terrible job of telling people how much good the system has done around the world. Capitalism has saved a couple billion people, and we have treated this miracle like a state secret. According to a 2013 survey, 84% of Americans are unaware of the progress made against poverty worldwide. Indeed, more than 2/3 think global hunger has actually gotten worse. This ignorance has consequences because there's no substitute for capitalism in the 5 innovations that make it work. Years of economic research tell us no other system comes close. Certainly not communism, not even socialism. You need a system that works while you sleep, one that creates the foundations of human prosperity without central planning or benevolent bureaucrats. More capitalism, more growth. The formula might seem deceptively simple, but it works. So how do we lift up the next billion? The answer should be clear. If you really want to help the poor, stand up for capitalism. I'm Arthur Brooks, President of the American Enterprise Institute for Prager University.
Interesting that it's had that big of impact, and yet we seldom talk about it. I have a question for you. Which country do you think this is? 70% of the citizens live in a rural area. 20% of the babies born die at birth. 10% have electricity. 52% of their income goes towards their food. And 10% own their home. And the life expectancy is 45 years old. Who would you guess would be, what country would this apply to? Yes?
A region, I would say somewhere in
Central Africa? That's a good guess. Anyone else?
What year are you talking about?
That's the right question. This is our country in the year 1850. So in 170 years, we have gone from that to what we experience here in America. In South Korea, this is a picture of what South Korea looked like in the 1950s. The GDP was about $155 per person they lived on per year. It was authoritative government. There was little or no electricity. It was an economic basket case, trapped in poverty with no hope for improvement. It was totally a disaster. I had no idea, maybe you guys knew this, I'd never heard this, that Samsung used to sell dried fish and noodles and vegetables. I know all they're known to me for is their TV is a great quality TV. And then in the late 70s, their first black and white TV, they actually gave away to if you had a subscription to a magazine. And then just recently, this last year or so, they invested $12.5 billion into research. So they went from almost a few $100s a year to almost $30,000 a year on an average for the GDP in South Korea within about 50 years. This is South Korea today. My wife and I had an opportunity to go over there. My son studied martial arts, and he was invited to compete in the World Games over there. So we went over there into Seoul, and I can tell you, this city could be like any city, large city in the United States. It's that advanced. That's what the free market system did for them. Oftentimes we hear in the media, what about the Baltic states? What about socialism? How could that benefit us in the US? And I think there's a real misunderstanding of actually what they practice, what kind of economic system they have in Sweden. So let's listen to this quick video on that research.
Today, many Americans don't like capitalism. Socialism would be better, they say. Not repressive Russian or Venezuelan socialism, but democratic socialism, like what's practiced in Scandinavia.
I think we should look to countries like Denmark, like Sweden.
Say, wow, you want to be like Sweden? Kinda. Sounds pretty good.
People interviewed in this just-released PBS documentary say America should be more like Sweden.
It seems like it's like a place that, like, no problems or something.
It is a socialist economy.
Volvos and socialized medicine.
Volvo is now a Chinese company.
Welcome to Stockholm, Sweden. My name is Jon Norberg, and this is where I was born and raised.
Johan Norberg made this documentary because he wanted to set the record straight.
Sweden is not socialist because the government doesn't own the means of production. To see that, you have to go to Venezuela or to Cuba or North Korea. But we did have a period in the 1970s and 1980s when we had something that resembled socialism, a big government that taxed and spent heavily. And that's the period in Swedish history when our economy was going south.
So much so that even socialists complained about the high taxes.
Astrid Lindgren, who wrote the very popular children's books, Pippi Longstocking, for instance, she was a social democrat, but she had made a lot of money from her books. She found that she paid 102% in taxes.
She wrote this angry essay about a witch who was quite mean and vicious, but not at all as vicious as the Swedish tax authorities.
And yet, even though taxes were high, they did not bring in enough money to fund Sweden's welfare state.
There were waiting lines to get health care. People couldn't get the pension that they thought that they depended on for the future. At that point, the Swedish population just said, enough, we can't do this.
Sweden then reduced government's role. They cut public spending, privatized the national rail network, abolished certain government monopolies, eliminated inheritance taxes, and sold state-owned businesses like the maker of Absolute Vodka.
Lower taxes, reform the pension system so that it wasn't unsustainable.
The results from the spending cuts and privatization?
This impoverished peasant nation developed into one of the world's richest countries.
All I hear is that Sweden is this socialist paradise.
We do have a bigger welfare state than the US, higher taxes than the US, but in other areas, when it comes to free markets, when it comes to competition, when it comes to free trade, Sweden is actually more free market.
That free market pays for Sweden's big welfare programs.
Today, our taxes pay for pensions. You call it social security. For 18-month paid parental leave, government paid childcare for working families.
But
having the government manage all of these things didn't work well. So we had to manage it in another way.
They privatized.
We realized in Sweden that with these government monopolies, we don't get the innovation that we get when we have competition.
And this is particularly true for the school system.
Sweden switched to a school voucher system that lets parents pick their kids' school and forces schools to compete.
And one of the results that we've seen is not just that the private schools are better than the public ones, but even the public schools in the vicinity of private schools, they often improve because they have to.
Sweden's version of Social Security was going broke, so Sweden privatized that too. Privatized the pension system. That terrifies people.
And obviously that scares people, but when they realized that the alternative was that the whole pension system would collapse, they thought that this is much better than nothing.
Now, the bulk of pensions is really contribution defined.
So if things are going well for Sweden, pensions are increasing. But if things are going less well, pensions are automatically lowered, which basically takes away from politicians the ability to buy votes by just promising higher pensions and letting future generations pay.
And when it comes to taxes, what Sweden does may surprise you.
Low-income earners in Sweden pay a lot more than low-income earners in America. So despite the fact that Sweden looks like sort of a socialist country which taxes the rich exorbitantly high, the truth is the opposite.
People who earn below average income pay up to 60% in taxes.
This is the dirty little secret about the Swedish tax system. We don't take from the rich and give to the poor. We squeeze the poor because they are loyal taxpayers.
Not taking more from the rich. School choice, privatization. Sweden is anything but socialist.
You can't turn your backs to the to the creation of wealth.
You can watch the full documentary, Sweden, Lessons for America, at freetochoose.tv.
Well, interesting that they found that by taxing their community or their country that it became very dysfunctional when the taxes got so high. There's a study done by Arthur Laffer, who is an economist in the 80s, and they determined that at a certain point of tax revenue and the rate, there's a diminishing rate of return. And what incentive does someone have to go out and take risk and generate opportunity if all the money's going to the government that they create, and then all of a sudden you become into a welfare state. So really interesting research on that point. We have the most incredible economical system in the world. I speak from experiencing it and being able to compete in it and to be able to enjoy the fruits of the labor that are allowed because of it. We also have compassion for those that are less fortunate and those that might have a mental or physical handicap or just due to self-imposed hardships find themselves not being able to take care of themselves, and whether it be Social Security or welfare. But I think it goes beyond that. I think it goes into our churches and our charitable organizations, and there are people using their time, talent, and resources to better our communities. Shannon and I actually went to a place called, it was next to Thailand, called Burma. And it's a small country, and they did a study on who's the most charitable country in the world. And believe it or not, Burma was the most charitable. And when we went in there, it had only been open to tourism for about 8 years due to civil war. And we went in there, and there were all these Buddhist temples everywhere. And about a third of the people actually live in poverty according to the standard of poverty in that country. And we asked the tour guide about the country, and they said, yeah, we have very charitable people. We have such a contrast in our country, because on the other end of our country, where the Civil War is that, and you can't fly over to there, is where the majority of the heroin is grown that is exported. So here they have some of the best charitable movements going, and then on the other end they have a lot of destruction that's happening. And in this study that was done, the second most charitable country in the world is the US. And in the US, the most charitable state is the state of Utah, because of the influence of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and the amount of dedication of time, talent, and resources of the membership there to help out those in whether it be a natural disaster, they find themselves in in a distressed way. And there are many organizations like that. Shannon and I actually attended a conference in January in Palm Springs where 700 of the top most successful business leaders in the country, could be argued in the world. It was amazing the individuals that were there. And they were all there to talk about how to use their resources to better social concerns, whether it be education or it be providing opportunity or it be criminal reform or all sorts of topics. And my point here is that here we have a system where a government's saying we want to bring in as much revenue as we can, but we have a system where they can't even manage their own pocketbook. I mean, if we could not manage our checkbook, we'd go bankrupt. If we continue to run our country like it is, it's going to go bankrupt. And so my thoughts are that the best way to accomplish this is have the tens of millions of people out there in a free enterprise system, and after they have more resources than they need to take care of themselves, they can look outward and figure out ways to help others in the community. And I think that's really, along with the basic safety net that government provides. So I think there needs to be a balance there, and I think that's what Sweden found, and I think we're in those discussions today. So I'd like to thank you very much for listening to my thoughts, and I'd like to open up to questions and answers and hear some of your thoughts. Thank you. Yeah, so the question is, when Shannon and I first started out with the additional resources that we had above and beyond our living expenses, we invested into real estate. And we started out small. We invested in twin homes, then we bought a few that were distressed and fixed those up, went into smaller commercial projects, went into find raw property that maybe farmers owned and would entitle those properties, and really focused on that for quite a few years, just different parcels, and then would sell them off to a builder or developer. And then as I transitioned, I decided to go into development halfway through my career and redirected. You know, that's what's interesting about the free enterprise system, that we have billions of us out there going through business models, trying to improve them, and many of us fall down, and the key is picking ourselves back up and learning from that lesson and doing it better. As we get older, we say, hey, let's watch what someone else does and learn from that and not have to go through the pain. But, and versus a single system that says, hey, we have one healthcare system, and if that fails, what are the alternatives? But we have multiple options, then, so you can take that on a broad level. But specifically, to answer your question of failures that I've experienced, I had this little business model up at Utah State, and I decided to rent part of a Grand Central garden area. And I thought I'd go out and buy some Christmas trees, throw them in there, and went to my banker. I had no credit, and he knew me, and based on a signature loan, gave me a $25,000 loan. So I went out there and I sold all these Christmas trees, and I made some pretty good money in 30 days. And I thought, man, that's great. So the following year, I decided to invite a friend, and he lived up in Idaho, and we expanded to 10 locations. And I went back to this banker, and I said, well, I don't need to borrow $25 million, I need to borrow $110 million. And here I'm excuse me, no, I didn't, 110,000, excuse me, yeah. 25,000, I work in millions now, but back then it was, got to keep track of that. But thank you, Shannon. So we borrowed $110,000 on my signature, had no assets. To this day, I was amazed that I had that kind of relationship with my banker. The fact was he was my bishop, so he knew me pretty well. But yeah, and I kept a good relationship with him. And we went out and we put all these trees out, and it was a very bitterly cold year. And my store in Logan performed well, but my partner up in Idaho, it was so cold, people didn't come out and buy the trees. And long story short is we ended up losing about $20,000 that year, or I lost $20,000 that year. And so I went out and I put it on a credit card and I paid it off in the next 6 months because that following year I graduated and I made $400,000 in my business model and was able to pay it off. But I learned a lesson that just bigger isn't better. And then also that you need to control the process. The other thing is I shouldn't have relied so much on my partner that had no experience and he heard the story and he wanted to participate in it. And he was a friend of mine, a missionary companion. And so there's a lot I learned from that. It was just a little small, simple thing. But there's many stories like that over the course of the years that I've gone through. And oftentimes in those situations you try to create lemonade out of lemons. So the question is that the United States creates the most billionaires in the world, but has the most debt. Now, is it referring to the debt of the government or the debt of the businesses? Government debt, okay. What's interesting is we are the wealthiest country in the world, and yet we have a tough time managing our finances. If I were to take that approach in my business, I would go bankrupt, out of business, and the lenders wouldn't lend us money. I think there's proper ratios. In my business, we have guidelines and we have pro formas that we go by, and we have a certain amount of debt that we feel comfortable with and the lenders feel comfortable with, and there's regulations that control that. Unfortunately, in our government, they control the checkbook, we don't, and we need to be more fiscally responsible, and those are tough problems. We need to figure out how to do that and also fund the entitlements and the growth, and those are the current the discussions we're having on Capitol Hill, and there's no easy solution to it. I think it's going to be like Sweden. We're probably going to come to a point where we hit the wall. We have to make some tough decisions. We get people in there willing to make those decisions. We're going to have to make some sacrifices, restructure it to where it's sound and financially viable, just like any other business entity would have to be accountable. Our government needs to be accountable in the same way. Thank you.
So, in 30 seconds, tell us how to be a great negotiator, Steve.
I think it's a good listener, and it's having a father that's a professor that gives you coaching along the way, too.
Okay, hey, thank you for coming.